day. Look to this day, for in it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. I invite you to rise. Let's sing one of my favorite hymns in the whole hymnal. So welcome to the Unitarian Church. My name is Nathan. I think I'm a little too echoey, but I don't know. I'm one of your ministers. I am pleased to welcome you. If you are a visitor, we are glad that you were here. Starting next week, we're going to have a What It Means to Be UU class that will be in one of the rooms over that way. There's a whole lot for you to know about. First of all, there is a blood drive going on. If 25% of this congregation gives their blood, I don't remember how it works, but somehow we can get the reward for most outstanding Unitarian church in Baton Rouge. And Our Lady of the Lake does not know we're the only Unitarian church, so I want that trophy. So give us your blood. Okay. Also, Together Baton Rouge is organizing a fundraiser to help with Jackson, Mississippi, and some of the problems they're having with water. So if you could go to TBR's website, they're trying to get $5,000 from their member congregations. Just go to Together Baton Rouge and look. We're going to have more links on that available. Also, a few things that are coming up that you should know. Today we're doing a Sunday Fun Day during middle hour, so I think children are going to be playing with bubbles. Youth are going to have a brunch. We actually just had a youth not lock-in last night, which had between 10 to 15 youth, depending on how you want to count. Because we had two different events that interspersed. Next week, are you preaching on Unitarian Universalism from the beginning? Is that the title?
That's not the beginning, but stay tuned.
That's not the beginning, but stay tuned.
That's not the title of it, but stay tuned.
It's not the title. We're trying to build some banter to let you know that something exciting is coming next week. Also next week, we're going to, one of the middle hour offerings is we're going to have Tanya Nyman. She is a member of this church and a civic activist, and she's going to be talking about how to, sort of what the status of the East Baton Rouge School Board is in general. So that's something that you could go be a part of next week during middle hour. And there's two things that are changing that you should know about. And neither of these are applause lines on either side. These are just statements of where we are, and people are going to feel all kinds of ways on all of this. The first is we asked you to wait until we finished this, the bump we expected to come from having kids in school before we removed the requirement for wearing masks in the sanctuary, in the church. We have passed that bump. And remember that consent is key in this. So even if you are comfortable not wearing a mask, there may be people who are would feel more comfortable around you if you were wearing one. We are now turning it over to you. We are no longer asking you to wear masks. We're leaving it to you to discuss. Also, we're still not lighting the chalice yet. You can light it at home, those of you online, if you'd like, but we're not going to do it yet. The other thing is we are starting to offer childcare again for our youngest kids. Remember, faith formation is between the services, but if you feel like you need a break, we will have childcare available. That is from now going forward. There's a lot of announcements. Are you all good? Online people, we're glad you're with us.
I knew a man once who came to church every Sunday. You may find nothing remarkable about this, but think of it. A man who came every Sunday, and it was not that he lacked other things to do. I knew him only in the last years of his life, a birthright Unitarian, a retired geologist who, when he was not at church, was a volunteer for Amnesty International, for the local food bank, for the ACLU, for the Family Planning Clinic, the AIDS Project, for the Unitarian Universalist district we were a part of, for the Audubon Society, and for a splendid community chorus. Busier than any of us still holding full-time jobs, he was committed, effective, clear about what he could and would, and by his own standards, what he should contribute to the causes that he cared for, the world and the people he cared for. But what set him apart from all of us was that he came every single Sunday. And because of his hearing loss, I think, more than any sense of his own importance, he sat in the front row. Why do you come, John? In all kinds of weather, when you're well and when you're not, when you like the guest speaker and when we know you don't. Why do you come every Sunday? I asked him not long before he died. His answer was straightforward, just like the man himself. I come, he said, because somebody might miss me if I didn't. He said it in a way not arrogant at all, but generously and honestly. He was the kind of person who saw it as his duty and his privilege to welcome newcomers on Sunday morning, not because he needed more friends himself. The man was 80 years old with a lifetime of friends and colleagues and acquaintances to spare. He had plenty of friends already, more than he could handle. He did it not because he wanted to evangelize the visitors or grow the church. On the contrary, He loved and missed the tiny congregation he had joined in 1955. He felt a little lost with so many new faces, a little sad at all of the changes. He greeted people as they came, and he steered them towards the minister, the coffee pot, the Sunday school, the guest book, the pledge cards, the sign-up sheets, because he felt it was the right and only thing to do. When people come into your home, you welcome them as if nothing in that moment mattered more. He worked hard on Sunday mornings. He got up on Sundays expecting to work hard to make others feel at home. He came with that in mind, and he was right. After he died, we missed him when he did not come. And you know what happened? The Sunday after his memorial, someone new who had never met John Eric and now would never have a chance, walked right in and sat down in his empty place in the front row. A whole family just sat right down as if they owned the place, as if they had every right to be there, as if we were glad to see them. Two women new to town and their toddler and baby. They came hoping there was room, and John himself would have been delighted.
Today we have cards for Myrtle David and for Paul Berry, as they are both recovering from an injury of one kind or another. And we have a congratulations card we're sending to two church members who got married, despite the fact that many of us didn't know. Pierre Sargent and Sandy Hubbard are now married. So we're sending a card to them. And this ritual we have is open to everybody, visitor and member alike. We invite those who wish to come forward either along the west or the east wall. Take a stone, let it represent whatever's on your heart, whatever's on your mind, whatever you're feeling. Place it in the chalice bowl. We now invite, and those of you online, please type it right into the chat. We now invite those who wish to come forward as we place stones. We say together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love. So last month, our stewardship consultant, Mark Ewert, came to take a look at our congregation and to figure out where we are. You're going to hear a lot more about this in October. But there's one thing he said that stuck with me. which leads eventually to the theme of today's service. So he's been doing consulting work for a number of UU congregations during and since the shutdown. Before also, but what I'm thinking of is during and since. And he said what is unique about most of the other churches is that when they came back after the shutdown, everything felt the same. This church, he said, however, is in a stage of forming unlike he's ever seen, because we have a different, both ministers, a different way we're doing RE, a different style, a different way we structure the sermon, a different thing that shows up before, different orientation of the doors being open or closed. I mean, all of these things are part of a forming congregation. We don't yet know what this next chapter in our religious identity will be. We know what it was. We know what it feels like. We know what it felt like for each of us when we came for the first time, and if this is your first time, this is going to be for you in 10 years. But the place we are in now as a congregation is more of a place of discovery. And thinking about it, maybe us being in a period of forming is a little more honest about where everyone in the world is. I genuinely think the pandemic has fundamentally shifted the ground we all stand on. It has changed cultural expectations, our own understandings of mortality. It has done so many things, and we don't know what those things are going to look like for a long, long time. I'm certain children who grew up, now my children, they will have some behaviors that are distinct, just like the Great Depression children did. Maybe because of the social isolation and then the interactions with masks, they will have a terrible time reading people's emotions. Or maybe because their first social interactions were with people where all you could see were their eyes, they're going to become some of the best people at reading emotions that we've ever seen. We don't know. All of this is to say we are in a stage of forming, and so I thought today we could look at our new theme. So remember last month, as we marked Reverend Chris's beginning as our minister of congregational life, we thought that as sort of marked the next chapter. So we announced the concept of the next chapter. But before we can write the next, like if we're writing a book, we have to think you need another chapter. And before you can write the chapter, which I guess we're going to do in October if we're going to really play this theme out, right now we have to understand what was, what is, where we are. So that leads me to the theme of today's service, the new Unitarian Universalists, or the new UUs, or the new us, if you want to really be a little jokey with the acronyms. So we also do a thing every month where we want you to know a new hymn, or not a new hymn, but we want a hymn that we're going to do the entire month that you'll be familiar with. And so we got one we're going to do today. Kathy's going to actually lead us in it. Is this the one from the installation, or is that next month?
That's next month.
All right, that's not this one. Ignore that. Just to invite you to rise. Those of you online, you can sit or stand, whatever you'd like.
And please do feel free to rise as you are willing and able, because you're probably going to want to move a little bit and possibly even clap on the second and fourth beat. I appreciate y'all so much. So we're going to do it through, it's from the, sorry, my mind just went blank. We're going to do it through the first time, that joy, this joy that I have. That screen will stay up for 2 screens because we're going to sing it through twice, and then we'll just go through the rest of it, and you will catch on really quickly, I think, to it. I will go through the first verse. If you know it, please join in. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me.
So here's the deal. In the before times, the very last time we did an offering drive, I did this stupid thing every week where I would tell you, if you gave a lot, LSU and the Saints would win. These are facts. These are facts. You weren't here for this. So let me state out facts that are different than conclusions, which you can draw on your own. Fact one, LSU or the Saints have not played yet this year.
Oh, yeah.
Fact number two, it is true in 2019, I started saying every week, I have no power over this. If you give a lot, maybe LSU and the Saints will win. I see a Clemson fan in here who is shaking her head, and I'm going to just keep going. Because it is true, I said that every week, and it is true you gave a lot of money. And it is also true, at the end of that season, LSU never lost a game and beat Clemson. It's true, these are facts. I told you we're not connecting them. We're just stating facts. I didn't do it for the last 2 years. LSU didn't do so well. So I don't know that there's any connection. I'm just saying that happened in 2019, and so here is the ask today. Also, what we are doing now is we are splitting the offering right down the middle. The entire month, we are going to share it with the Interfaith Federation, and in particular, the Holy Grill. This church was instrumental in the founding of the Interfaith Federation. One of the Interfaith Federation's past presidents within the last 5 years is a member of this church. The prayer breakfast, which all of you all are invited to, you can find Becky Curo, she has tickets, happens in the middle of this month. So we want to give half of the offering away, I have a warning for you, to the Interfaith Federation. So if you want to make 2019 happen again, and Clemson fan, don't listen to this, maybe if we give a lot of money, now we got to give twice as much because we're giving half of it away. We'll just see how LSU does tonight. Also, the warning, we solicited a video, and this is exactly the kind of video that I wanted, kind of. So we solicited videos from the different organizations to just tell you a little about what they're doing. We didn't want like a fancy, expensive, slick video. We just wanted someone to just hold up their phone and say, here's who we are, here's what we're doing, would you contribute? And they did. But they did in the gym as they were setting up for the Holy Grill. So if you do not like table scratching, just cover your ears for the next 30 seconds. Right after the video, we will take the offering. So with the video, this morning's offering is now given and received.
Hi, this is John Parks. I'm the Executive Director at Interfaith Federation of Greater Baton Rouge, and I am so glad to be able to share just with a couple of minutes with you all this morning, or a few seconds. I am here at Cadillac Street Park at the Holy Grill site where we do feeding ministry and have been for the past 36 years. Our volunteers are getting set up right now because, and I'm doing this video early because if we were in here when everybody was here, the fans would be on and it'd be too loud. And there'd also be a lot of conversation going on. This is a wonderful environment here at Holy Grill up in Zion City. And when you all contribute to the Interfaith Federation with your offerings and through the membership, you all are part of what's going on here day by day. Not just feeding, but also providing programs for children, literacy events, health fairs, all kinds of important things. So thank you all for being a part of what the Interfaith Federation is doing. And if you're interested in personally joining us and volunteering at some point, please contact us. We would love to have you come out.
To understand who we are, we must first understand who we were. This particular faith is a merger of two distinct white New England religions, not theologies. That's different. Unitarianism developed as a direct response to Calvinism, which thought that people were destined to hell before they were even born. Unitarianism was kind of always this theologically progressive response to orthodoxy. You have to understand, in religious context, a theological conservative is someone who is essentially, like the further along the spectrum you get, a theological conservative is a fundamentalist. Someone who says this one religion or particular articulation of belief is the one fundamental right way. And you can have a fundamentalist Catholic or Buddhist or atheist. The spectrum lives over every faith expression. A religious liberal essentially says there were multiple truths, not just one truth. So over time, many of these white congregational churches in New England, which started mostly as puritanical Calvinist churches, saw their theology adapt and change until it became closer to what we now know of as Unitarianism. The Universalist side of our ancestry weren't necessarily anti-Trinitarian the same way that the Unitarians were. Although over time, those views changed and adapted. The Universalists believed that there was no such thing as eternal damnation. There was no such thing as an angry, punishing God who would forever punish you for simply being a human being. Now, they disagreed, especially over the generations, on whether or not there would be some punishment or no punishment after death. But they all agreed that eventually we would all be restored. Please keep in mind there's a difference between Unitarian and Universalist institutions and Unitarian and Universalist theologies. The belief in one God and no hell is biblically sound. Throughout the history of Christianity, you will find over and over people reading the Bible and discovering the Trinity was added later, and that whenever you read references to hell, it's often a misinterpretation of something else. You can trace Unitarian and Universalist theological ideas through Christianity all the way into Judaism. But the institutional threads lead us back to white New England in the 1617 and 1800s. As I build towards the conclusion of this service about what we are as new UUs, there's a key theological idea I'd like for you to keep in your head. The phrase is the transient and the permanent. You see, there was this thing that happened in 1800 Unitarianism. So at the start of the 1800s, there were no Unitarians, except for if someone used that term in a derogatory sense to describe sort of the more progressive churches in New England. But by the end of the century, there were clearly Unitarian churches. In 1819, Minister William Ellery Channing preached a sermon called Unitarian Christianity, where he basically outlined the tensions between the liberal and orthodox congregational churches. And in that, he said that I can't preach on Unitarian Christianity today. It's a really cool sermon that apparently when he preached, did you learn this? When he preached it, no one could hear him. Like, he just mumbled through the whole thing, and the only reason we have it is someone in the front row took notes. But so he preached in 1819 about Unitarian Christianity, which gave the name, and so more progressive congregational churches started calling themselves Unitarian churches. In 1825, he formed the American Unitarian Association. So these churches who identified as Unitarians could freely associate with each other. So there's basically these three white ministers in New England in the mid-1800s that kind of kicked us out of Christianity. So he was the first who did it. He gave us the term Unitarian. The second was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who many of you probably have already heard of. There's a whole sermon on him for a different day, but essentially he preached this one sermon where he said if a minister preaches without using their personal experience, they are defrauding the worshiper, which doesn't sound like that big a deal, but before that, God lived in the Bible. After that, for you to be a good minister, you had to preach from yourself, which means God lives in you. So that was the second kind of push out from under that. The third push of us out from under Christianity came by a man named Theodore Parker. In 1841, he preached a sermon called The Transient and Permanent in Christianity. The little factoid, the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice, that y'all have heard Obama quote King, who quoted Lincoln, who quoted Theodore Parker, but he put it in a much more convoluted way, so it's not as pretty as it is now. But I do want you to know a little of who Theodore Parker was. So he was a Unitarian minister in the mid-1800s. He was so assertive and probably miserable to interact with that most of the other Unitarian ministers would not list him on their list of ministers. They would cross the street when they saw him coming. When he preached in Boston, his church had 2 to 3% of the city as its members. At a time where many Unitarians who benefited greatly from slavery were a little more quiet on the whole slavery debate, he was a very outspoken abolitionist. I believe he was also a part of the Underground Railroad, and he not only openly rebelled against the Fugitive Slave Act, but he was one of the 6 people who secretly funded John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Anyway, so I digress. But so he preached a sermon on the transient and permanent in Christianity. And in this sermon, he said that there are two things in Christianity. The transient, the things that are always changing. So who are the clergy? Whether the communion bread is leavened or unleavened. The things that change over time. Whether Mass is in Latin or in English, that kind of stuff. The permanent, however, in Christianity was the message that Jesus preached, this message of radical love and forgiveness. And here is where Parker got into trouble and probably made a bunch of people mad. He said that Jesus happened to be the one who delivered that message, but he was transient in Christianity as well. In other words, anybody could have delivered that message, and whoever happened to deliver the message would have been the reason Christianity existed, not Jesus. So you had Channing in 1819 saying that you can now be a Unitarian versus a Trinitarian. Then Emerson in 1838 saying the Bible is not the source of revelation, you are. And then you have, because remember, Unitarians were Christian, clearly Christian until this point. And then in 1841, Theodore Parker said, you can be a Unitarian Christian and you don't need Jesus to do it. So those are kind of the 3 that pushed us. But because we as a congregation are in such a dramatic state of forming and reforming, I will encourage you to think about what is transient in this church, in this congregation specifically. What are the things? The reason I want you to think of this is one of the things that Mark Ewart also said when he came is that you are tired. You have been through so much these last few years and you just want church. Like you just want to be able to sit here and be a part of church again. And so I'd encourage you to think about, as we are in a state of forming, what are the things that are transient? What are the things that you can let go of, whether you love them or hate them, that are going to go over time? Not that we have anything in mind, just that's the state of the world. And what are the things that are permanent? That no matter what we change, if we change the hymns or the seats or the chalice or the microphones or the clergy or the congregation, what are the things that are permanent about your faith that will never go away?
The humanist tradition was mine for a long time, but we don't have this all permanently figured out in any discrete moment in time. In my case, it was a direct experience of something I hadn't counted on, the kind of direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, which we also affirm as a source of our faith tradition, that changed my mind. In the midst of a crisis, my son Billy, then 15, had overdosed on drugs, and it was unclear whether he would live. As I sat with him in the hospital, I found myself praying. First, the selfish prayer for forgiveness. for the time not made, for too many trips, for the many things unsaid, and sadly, for a few things said that should have never crossed my lips. But as the night darkened, I finally found the pure prayer, the prayer that asked only that my son would live. And late in the evening, I felt the hands of a loving universe reaching out to hold, the hands of God, the Spirit of life. The name was unimportant. I knew that those hands would be there to hold me, whatever the morning brought. And I knew that I cannot tell you how, that those hands were holding my son as well. I knew that I didn't have to walk that path alone, that there's a love that has never broken faith with us and never will. My son survived, but the experience stayed with me. That is my experience and my vocabulary for that experience. But religious language doesn't have to mean God talk, and I'm not suggesting that Unitarian Universalism return to traditional Christian language. But I do feel that we need some language that would allow us to capture the possibility of reverence, to name the holy, to talk about human agency in theological terms, the ability of humans to shape and form our world, guided by what we find to be of ultimate importance.
So I'm going to change things up a little. I'd like for us to do this hymn seated. After the hymn, we're going to have the music keep playing, we'll do a prayer, and then we'll do the last verse of the hymn again. Robin, do you have it? We're going to do the hymn all the way through, pause on the hymn, we'll do a prayer, and then we'll do the last verse again, right where you're seated. That divine spirit, whatever it is that holds us together that many call God, be with us on this day and help us to be grateful that we are here. Help us to be grateful who are here with us. Steady our hearts as we look to the gulf and hope for the best. Help us to be agents of joy and of change and of transformation. Open our hearts to all those we've needed to cut out for so long. Help us make the world we've always deserved. Amen.
Where we are a sanctuary, each made holy, loved right through. With thanksgiving, we are a living sanctuary anew.
Often when I do premarital counseling, I ask the couple, how are they going to love the person they have yet to meet? That it is easy to stay committed to someone that you know right now, but the spiritual challenge of marriage is to be committed to someone knowing that both of you are going to grow and to change over time. And to allow the other person to be in their fullness, even though they aren't the same person in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or beyond. Buddhism, I've always struggled with this part of Buddhism. They talk about how life is suffering. And then once someone described what it meant, and I kind of got it. Sitting in a chair for 5 minutes is not suffering. It's pretty comfortable. Sitting in a chair for an hour is probably okay. 8 hours starts to get a little miserable. And if you sit in the chair for months and months and months without ever moving, it becomes suffering. In other words, all of life is change, and our job as a religious institution is to give you the tools to deal with the inevitable shifts and transformations that will happen. And the church is tricky because we need to have one foot into the past. We need to be dedicated to tradition because we are the curators of our members' stories and of this faith story. We're the curators of the riverbed that we are in, so to speak. And the other foot needs to be pulling towards the future, towards what is next. Think of that as you, the water droplets in the river that are crafting a new path that the river will be on, although we don't yet know what it will be. In the last part of the service, I will talk about what this new Unitarian Universalism we are in is. But I wanted you to kind of understand that each generation creates their own world. Its theology, its sense of humor. And they create it by being raised in the imperfection and the human flaws of the previous generation. So I want you to know the current waves that are washing over this congregation where you sit right now. There's a wave that happened in the late 1800s to early 1900s that I don't know about, so we're going to pretend that doesn't exist because I didn't study it. But at some point in the mid-20th century, much of Unitarianism and Universalism, and remember these two religions merged in 1961, but both Unitarianism and Universalism embraced a deep and rich humanism. It started as religious humanism, but as it moved and adapted until over time, it almost became a secular manifestation of religion. You know the God is Dead movement that happened in the 1960s? Like that's the prime example of that. It showed up as Unitarian Universalist churches stopping calling themselves churches. They would call themselves fellowships or societies or congregations. And I think this was a generational reaction to the failures of the previous generation. In the 1950s and 60s, Unitarians especially, but Unitarians and Universalists retreated into their heads in ways that we hadn't seen in previous generations. Many of the services were not about feeling, but about thinking. A lot of the rituals were removed. Anything that could sort of tap you into the feeling parts were removed from a lot of UU churches. And it makes sense. The world was grappling with the inhumanity of the first two world wars and the Holocaust. In predominantly white churches like ours, even though it was often dedicated to integration and ending racism, the civil rights movement no doubt made white people feel so uncomfortable that they felt unsafe. And when people feel unsafe, they retreat into their heads. So we had an entire wave of people retreating into their heads. And that is the church that I grew up in. In the 1980s, it avoided my society that I grew up in, it avoided terms like prayer and God and any reference to the Bible. I grew up seeing both the beauty and the failures of this particular theological wave. It helped me feel like my doubts and my cynicism were welcomed, but it also gave me absolutely no tools to communicate with my peers at school. This secular propensity left me without the language to have things in common with people that I had things in common with. In the 1990s, Unitarian Universalism saw a resurgence of paganism all over the place, congregations everywhere, all over the continent. Some imprecise combination of the increase in women in ministry, the perceived failures of the humanist wave, the state of the world in the 80s and 90s, the fact that the world was shrinking, that more people were going to work in a world where there was a growing disparity between rich and poor, all of this resulted in Unitarian Universalists all over the place saying that they needed more ritual and they needed more gods or goddesses in this case, and not no God, but multiple. And they wanted ritual back. To say that there were tensions between the humanists and the pagans would be a seismic understatement. When I was in high school, and not just, within churches, like I grew up in those tensions all the time. There was a church in Beaumont where I think it was a Baptist church, found out that there was a pagan group meeting there and started just reading the names of all the members. Does anyone remember this? No, just me? Okay. I was in high school, like I formatted all of this. But there were tensions everywhere, like based on this, partially because the humanists had figured out there is no God, and the pagans came in and said, well, no, there's many gods. And the humanists had figured out that ritual is not good, and the pagans said ritual is really good. So there was tension. For me as a teenager, I didn't hear the word prayer or God, but I did become more familiar with these rituals and these emotionally based worship services. And then in 2003, the then president of our association, Reverend William Sinkford, who Reverend Chris read that excerpt from earlier, preached a sermon where he called for us to bring back a language of reverence. Not necessarily to use all of the religious language of the past, but to come up with new words that would give us access to the divine experiences that we were having, words that got us out of our brains a little more, and words that could help us connect with other religious people in the world. And when that wave hit, the humanists and the pagans hated it. Not like hate, but there was tension again. Because this happens every time there's a new theological wave. And there was a tension between whatever the group that I didn't study and the humanist way back in the early 1900s, but I don't know what that one is. I think this is just a natural state of how things go from generation to generation. That reverential wave is the wave that I came to as an adult and the wave that I went to seminary with. So for those of you who are humanist or atheist and wish that I were more that's not the wave I came in on. And for those of you who are pagan who wish I was more that is not the wave that I came in on. And right now, through our intentional action and some of our intentional inaction or our mistakes or our just plain humanness, and especially in the ways that we think we've figured out the world, we are creating a new theological wave in our children, and they are seeing our failings, and they're going to bring it here, and I am going to hate it because I got it right, and how dare they point out how I didn't get it right? How dare they point out how I didn't get it right? So I want you to know, I see this as a natural flow, theological flow, and I want you to know where you are sitting right now among those waves. This is the riverbed, not the individual. Your belief is your belief. That is how you make sense of your experience. But the waves, now I'm mixing metaphors, because rivers have waves, but Your beliefs shape this, and your experiences shape this, but we're also in an institution. Does that make sense? So it brings back the question, what is transient and what is permanent in this faith? What will sustain you when the next wave hits our faith? It may not be a belief in God, it may not be a belief in goddesses, it may not be a dedication to a specific use of word or prayer or not. It may not be any of those things. So what is the permanent in your faith?
Is contemporary worship contemporary? No. The key to attracting younger generations is not the style of worship that attracted the boomers when they were young. I expect that contemporary worship services, as we have known them, will mostly disappear as boomers disappear. To attract younger generations, congregations must examine their entire ministry from Monday through Sunday. Are we authentically studying and practicing the teachings of Jesus? Is our worship performance or a spiritual experience? Is our worship filled with authentic, uplifting, tried and true methods of connecting the attendees with God and neighbor? Does it lead directly to action that expresses spiritual commitment? Does it lead to deeper understandings of who and whose we are? To attract the younger generations today, we can't continue to argue about traditional versus contemporary worship experiences. Our worship, no matter what its form, needs to tap the deep well springs that our faith traditions have offered to every generation. Quality content in worship, not shifting to formats like contemporary worship, will give younger generations what they are searching for.
That reading was from a research article a member sent me. And it was, it was more geared towards Christian churches, but it had never occurred to me that a specific style of worship was generationally specific. From time to time, church members will ask me to stop saying God so much. Or church members will ask me to say God more, or to preach in a different style. And I am a people pleaser, and so I want to tell every person who meets with me that I'm going to do it. But the reality is I cannot. I know what I believe today, but I do not know how the world will change it tomorrow. I am one misdiagnosis, one missed red light, one unfortunately reproducing cell away from having the very fundamentals of my belief questioned. I don't know what I will believe if or when my world shifts from underneath me. So what I tell all of these members as you ask and sort of, and this is let me pause here. Preaching and ministry is a dialogue. So you should not ask these things. You should always say what you're experiencing, church, and what you need, and what should change, and what you hope would change, and what you love. And know that the only thing the ministers can promise you is that we will authentically preach our truth as we understand it in that moment. And that the world will likely change us. So I can promise you that I will authentically preach what I believe and admit when it changes. And that is what I hope for this church. And that is why I am so excited about writing this next chapter with you. If this church is anything, I hope that it is authentic. I cannot tell you all the number of times I've been to a Roots class or a new UU class where at least the first session, if not the first two sessions, are filled with these kind of skeptical questions where you can tell the participants, these are people who are visitors to the church who are interested in membership, are waiting nervously to find out what the trick is. Did you have that when you've been here? Yeah. But did you have that at your first time? No. Well, okay, well, she's a bad example. But some of you did. Because I could feel it in the room. It wasn't every group, but often I could just feel it. And they were waiting for us to just sort of, pull the curtain back and show that we're secretly something that we're not. And I get it. In a world of slick and clever churches who disguise regressive or oppressive theologies behind nice words and sharp presentations, I wouldn't blame people who wait to find out that we are not who we say we are. I hope you find out we are who we say we are. I've also seen Unitarian churches notice this and go out of their way to be bad at worship to prove they're authentic, which I also don't think we should do. So I promised you I would preach on this new Unitarian Universalism that is now informed by all of the forming this church has done, by everything that is going on in the world. The new UUs, the new us, because this church is forming unlike any time in its recent history. And you deserve to know what you are walking into. So here is my answer. I have no idea. I have guesses. I have my heart and soul set on what the permanent in this faith is, but the transient is just going to keep changing. I don't think any of us know what this church or what this world is going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years, for good and for bad. So let's be the church that owns that and tries to intentionally form it. I know that right now we are not where we were, and this is not where we are going to be. I know that we are in a healthy place as a congregation, and I know that many of you are unraveled. Many of you are barely hanging on. That's a phrase I used a lot during the pandemic, which was to say, I'm okay if everything's okay. But if something happens, then it all falls apart for me. Just me? Okay, everyone's nodding yes, so I assume it's just me. Okay, good. I should ask in a more inversely affirmative way so I can get confirmation. I know that many of us are struggling with depression or anxiety or addiction. If you're anything like me, you can't remember things as well as you could before all of this trauma happened. I know that many of us worry about the state of the world, and we're trying to figure out our place with climate change and with this perpetual threat of deadly weather. I know that the rain that we had yesterday probably freaked some of us out. The seemingly insurmountable style of misinformation that is separating us from the people we're supposed to be closest to is challenging us. I know that. I know that church doesn't feel the way that church was before. I know that it is different and probably uncomfortable, and it might get more uncomfortable in the next few years. But this church is still here for you. You are still here for each other. And you are here for this world. The permanent in this faith, the thing that I think you can rely on every single week, is the knowledge that you are good, that you were born a product of goodness, that the world needs you, and that we know we have not reached the promised land. But we know that this world can do it. And we do not need death for salvation, for any of you. We know that we may be the ones saving each other. While we know that suffering is a part of life, we know that we are a part of something larger. We know that when we are gone, the world will continue on, not without us, not without our experience or our influence, but that someone else will find a chair. And even still, we are held by something holy. The new Unitarian Universalism will always be okay so long as we create the environment for our people to authentically be ourselves. Not just in this church, but in the world. That is the faith that I have. If you are able to be truly who you are, And that is what we are working for, regardless of your gender, or because of your gender, because of your sexuality, because of your race, because of the cultures you were raised in. They shouldn't be hidden, they shouldn't be covered up, they shouldn't be avoided or banned from the library. The belief in this church is if you are allowed to be fully who you are, the world is better for it. And we know we are the ones who are here today. We know we are the ones who can celebrate this great gift of being alive, so let's celebrate it. We are the ones who can make each other's lives better. So whatever you need to do to celebrate this week, to be together, to enjoy the great gift that none of us asked for, please go and do it. Amen. Let's sing.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunderclouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
As you go out this week, go be more kind than you think people deserve. Love the hell out of them. Amen. Go in peace.